Quick, you have 2 seconds to name these two countries.
Blue
You're wrong,
green.
unless you got it right. Then good job. They are, of course, Honduras and El Salvador.
Okay.
One thing these two countries have in common is being fanatic about football. Or if you're a freedom-loving patriot, soccer. But do they love it so much they would go to war over it?
Freedom-loving
You bet
patriot.
they would. And that is no bueno.
Okay, here we go. Football war.
If you look at these two countries,
time
you
to
might
get to
notice
this
one major difference, and that is that this one is a lot bigger than this one. However, this one had a larger population than this one, made up mostly of farmers, and there wasn't enough land for them to live and work on. So they started moving from El Salvador to Honduras in search of land, and by the 1960s, a huge number of illegal immigrants had crossed over the border from El Salvador.
Wow, okay.
Meanwhile, in Honduras, it's 1963, and this guy has just staged a military coup to prevent the rise of communism and is now the military leader of the country. He immediately began harassing the peasants' unions and other left-wing groups, but
Do you
he's a
like
little
that?
insecure
Do
about
you?
the legitimacy of his leadership. So he holds an election and wins, but then the opposing party says, hey man, that election was clearly corrupt and fraudulent, and also you've been bribed by the rich American banana companies who are taking all of our bananas tax-free, and now our economy is in ruins,
Tax-free.
and everyone started to get mad at him. Now, if you ever find yourself the barely legitimate military
Start a
leader of
war.
a corrupt Central American
Already
country,
know.
and you start getting into hot water, here's a bit of advice that has been tried and tested throughout the centuries. Blame something else.
Oh, okay.
So he blamed the Salvadoran immigrants for
I was
stealing
wrong.
all the land and all the jobs and ruining Honduras.
Thought he was gonna
The
start a
immigrants
war.
found themselves under attack by the hostile locals. Egged on by the rich American banana companies who wanted all the bananas to themselves, the Honduran government began evicting Salvadoran immigrants
good
who had been
bananas.
living on the land for generations and started sending them back to El Salvador.
swear I do
the
love
Salvadoran elite were
bananas.
furious and protested, citing moral reasons, but in reality, they were just getting a little too crowded. So tensions were about as high as they could be, but then
Football. Go.
it's the 1970 World Cup qualifiers, and both countries
Okay.
finished top of their qualifying tables, so it was now time for them to play against each other in a series of matches.
Here we go.
The first match took place in Honduras. The night before the game, Hondurans gathered outside the Salvadoran team's hotel, making noise and taunting them. The next day, Honduras defeated the exhausted Salvadorans with a late 90th minute goal. After the match, a young Salvadoran fan, unable to bear her country's defeat, shot herself.
Whoa.
Disturbingly, the Salvadoran government glorified the incident and made her into a national hero.
What?
And at the next game, fans brought pictures of her to the stadium. Emotions were running high as the next match took place in El Salvador, and this time the tables were turned.
Jeez.
The Hondurans had to endure a sleepless night in their hotel, and the next day, before the match started, instead of the Honduran flag, the Salvadorans raised a dirty rag.
Oh,
So great job
jeez.
at reducing tensions. El Salvador won decisively over the exhausted Hondurans, while spectators battled in the stands. Team Honduras fled home in a bulletproof bus with rocks being thrown at
What?
them, and the Honduran coach reportedly told his players that they were lucky they lost. In response to the defeat, Hondurans began terrorizing the Salvadoran settlers even more, in some cases reportedly throwing them off their land and burning down their homes, and the
Whoa.
immigrants began fleeing back to El Salvador. The final game in Mexico would decide who went to the World Cup. It was close, but El Salvador came out victorious, knocking Honduras out of the tournament. The atmosphere was riotous, literally, and back
Oh,
in Honduras,
jeez.
attacks on the Salvadoran immigrants further increased. This was too
So
much for
it's-
El Salvador to bear, with its people under
It's like what
attack and
happens
an
when,
unmanageable
you know,
refugee crisis
teams
on
win in the
El
US and
Salvador
people start
severed
rioting
diplomatic ties with Honduras
in their
and
downtown
declared war.
area.
The football war is also known as the 100 Hours War,
Hmm.
because that's how long it lasted, making it one of the shortest wars in history.
That's crazy.
El Salvador started by carrying out
100
air raids on strategic locations within Honduras, including Toncontin International Airport, which prevented the Honduran Air Force from getting into the sky. Then, with their superior army, they began an invasion along 2 major roads, complete with light tanks and infantry. Their advance was rapid, and they were quickly approaching the Honduran capital. Then the Organization of American States met in a bit of a panic and unanimously agreed that war between El Salvador and Honduras was a bad thing and probably shouldn't
War is
continue.
bad.
So they went to El Salvador and
War
said,
is not
"Can you
good."
please stop invading?" And El Salvador declared, "Not until they stop being jerks." And so the war went on.
Day 3.
The Honduran Air Force finally got into the sky, and with aid from neighboring Nicaragua, they successfully
Oh,
carried
wow.
out air raids on Salvadoran air bases and oil facilities, crippling the Salvadoran supply line and stopping their advance dead. Caught in a bit of a stalemate, the situation was no longer advantageous to El Salvador, so when the Organization of American States once again asked them to stop and agreed to ensure the safety of the Salvadoran immigrants, El Salvador relented, and a ceasefire was organized on the 18th of
pretty
July.
much it.
Then the OAS said, "Can you now please withdraw your troops from Honduras? No, please, no, please, no, please, no. Do it or we'll sanction you." You know what? Just for you, I'll do it. So El Salvador pulled its troops out of Honduras on the 2nd of August,
You know
and with
what?
casualties in the thousands, the war
Wow.
was over. The economies of both
I mean,
nations were damaged
for
by
100
the war,
hours,
and El
still a lot
Salvador
of death.
didn't have the capability to take care of all the returning immigrants, a crisis that eventually helped cause a civil war.
Lovely
The war left
street
behind
corners
land
for you to
and
live
border
on.
disputes,
Okay.
some of which are still a cause of tension to this day. El Salvador went on to play in the World Cup, but lost every match they played and didn't make it past the group stage.
Jeez.
So in the end, nobody achieved anything, and there were no winners. Except for this guy.
USA, USA. We love our bananas, right? Literally a war I would have never known about had I not watched this video. Like, this is a war over, soccer and immigrants and just a few other things, but soccer being one of the main things, I was kind of a proponent of this. It's a little bit crazy. Seeing how things led to the actual war, which was one of the shortest wars in history based on this. I didn't know that. 100 Hours War. That's crazy. So football war, but also the 100 Hours War. You got what, 4 days of a war, roughly, and then it's done. And nothing really got accomplished. El Salvador loses. The immigrants go back to El Salvador. America still has their bananas. That's that's pretty much how it went. Pretty much it. Short and sweet and to the point, but very, very informative because I would have never known. But let me know if you learned something from this. This was fun. It's something I would have never known before. Let's talk about it in the comments as always. I think we got World War II next. Some more Hitler stuff going on there. So I think we got that next, I believe. So we'll check that out. And thanks for watching. Check out more videos down below as always. And I will see you guys on the next video. Take care.